If you've ever had something genuinely good happen, and your first instinct was to keep it to yourself, this is going to feel familiar. Not because you're secretive, not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because somewhere in you, good news doesn't automatically feel safe to share. Some people announce their wins before the ink is dry, and some people wait. They sit with it. They tell almost no one, or they mention it in a way that barely counts as mentioning it. Like it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. And the fact that you stayed quiet about it says more than most people realize. So let's talk about the psychology of people who keep their good news quiet, what it often means, where it comes from, and what it quietly does to your identity over time. Because a lot of the time, it's not humility, it's protection. When someone keeps good news quiet, the behavior can look small on the outside. They get accepted somewhere and they don't post it. They land a new job and they only tell one person. They start dating someone kind and they avoid even saying the name out loud. They hit a personal goal, and when someone asks how things are going, they shrug and say, "Yeah, it's fine." And it's not that they don't feel happy. It's that the happiness feels exposed. Like if they name it, it becomes reachable, touchable, something other people can react to. And that's where the hidden meaning starts. For a lot of quiet celebrators, sharing good news doesn't feel like sharing joy. It feels like handing something fragile to a room full of strangers and hoping nobody drops it. So the nervous system chooses what feels safer: silence, or selective sharing, or downplaying it so nobody can take it away emotionally. One deeper pattern underneath this is what I'd call emotional risk management. Some people were raised in environments where good things didn't get protected, they got examined. You share something you're excited about, and someone laughs, questions it, corrects you, or warns you not to get your hopes up. You say you like someone, and suddenly it becomes a family conversation. You're proud of something, and someone finds the flaw in it immediately. So you learn a very specific lesson. Good news invites commentary. It invites opinions. It invites energy. And sometimes it invites disappointment. Not even because the good thing won't happen, but because the response ruins it. So you start keeping your happiness private, not because you don't trust yourself, but because you don't trust what happens around your happiness. That's not weakness. That's pattern recognition. And you can see it in small micro behaviors, like rewriting a text about good news 10 times, trying to make it sound casual, adding "I don't know" to something you actually know, or giving the update in a joking tone so no one can tell how much it matters, or waiting until the result is guaranteed before telling anyone, because uncertainty feels like a vulnerable state to be witnessed in. Some people even avoid eye contact when talking about something good, like their body is trying not to draw attention to it. Almost like, if I keep it small, it stays safe. And that becomes more than a communication style. It becomes an identity. The low-maintenance one, the private one, the one who doesn't make a big deal, the one who handles things alone. And on the surface, that identity looks mature. But internally, it often comes with a quiet cost. Because if your joy only feels safe when it's hidden, then being seen starts to feel like danger. Another layer people don't talk about much is the role of envy. Not even dramatic envy, just the subtle social shift that can happen when something goes well for you. Sometimes you share good news and you can feel it. The tone changes, the support gets thinner, the conversation gets shorter. Someone makes a joke that isn't really a joke. Someone reminds you of how hard it will be. Someone competes or withdraws. And your brain remembers that as a social consequence. When I win out loud, I lose connection. So the person doesn't stop achieving, they just stop sharing. They keep the good thing quiet, not because they're ashamed of it, but because they're trying to protect relationships from shifting. It's a way of staying emotionally in the group, staying relatable, staying non-threatening.
In some circles, being openly happy feels like breaking an unspoken rule, like you're not allowed to rise too high. So you stay quiet, not because you don't deserve it, but because you don't want to pay for it socially. There's also the jinx factor, and even people who don't believe in superstition still do a version of this emotionally. They don't say it out loud because saying it out loud makes it real. And when something is real, it can be taken, it can be delayed, it can fall apart. So staying quiet feels like controlling the outcome, like you're keeping the thing in a sealed container until it's safe.
And if you've lived through enough moments where happiness got interrupted by criticism, by chaos, by sudden loss, then that makes sense. Sometimes silence is the brain's way of not getting ahead of itself, not getting attached too early, not giving life the chance to pull the rug out. It's not pessimism, it's emotional self-defense. And here's where it gets interesting, because most people assume this is about confidence, like maybe they don't believe in themselves, or maybe they're just humble. But the real reason often isn't confidence, it's control. Not controlling other people, controlling exposure, controlling the emotional variables, controlling how many people get access to your vulnerable feelings. Because good news creates a very specific vulnerability. It gives people something they can react to. They can validate it, dismiss it, question it, minimize it. They can bring their own insecurity into it. They can even make it about themselves. And for someone who learned early that other people's reactions are unpredictable, privacy becomes a form of stability, a way to keep your inner world from being influenced, a way to keep your excitement clean. Because once you share something, it's not just yours anymore. It becomes social, it becomes interactive. And if your emotional safety has ever depended on keeping things contained, then sharing good news can feel like opening the door and letting anything walk in. So you keep the door closed, even when what's inside is beautiful. There's another angle that's surprisingly common. Some people don't share good news because they're used to being the strong one. In a lot of families and friend groups, someone quietly becomes the emotional anchor, the steady one, the one who doesn't need anything. And when you've been cast in that role for long enough, sharing joy can feel like taking up space, like asking for attention, like shifting the focus onto you. So even positive attention can feel uncomfortable because you're not used to being held that way. You're used to holding others. So your good news stays private, not because you don't want to be celebrated, but because being celebrated feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels exposed. Over time, this pattern shapes identity in a quiet way. Because if you repeatedly experience your happiest moments in private, you start to associate joy with isolation. You become someone who processes the biggest parts of life alone, even the good parts. And that can make connection feel slightly off, like people know you, but they don't know your life. They know your personality, but they don't know your wins. They know your humor, your taste, your opinions, but not your progress. And sometimes that's intentional, but sometimes it creates this strange emotional gap where you're surrounded by people, but you're not fully witnessed. And being unwitnessed for too long can start to feel like invisibility, not because anyone is neglecting you, but because you learned to disappear at the exact moments you deserved to be seen. There's also a more tender possibility. Sometimes people keep good news quiet because they don't want to make anyone else feel bad. They know what it's like to struggle. They're sensitive to other people's pain, so they shrink their own joy preemptively, just in case it might land wrong. That often comes from empathy, but it can also come from a history where you had to manage other people's emotions to stay safe, where someone else's jealousy, sadness, or criticism became your responsibility. So now you instinctively soften your own happiness before anyone even asks you to. You edit yourself, not because you're fake, because you're careful. And careful used to be necessary. So what does all of this mean? It means keeping good news quiet is rarely random.
It's usually a pattern that formed for a reason. It can come from being dismissed, from being watched too closely, from having your excitement punished, teased, or used against you, from feeling the social consequences of success, from being the stable one, from learning that privacy equals peace. And even when life is safer now, the pattern can remain, because it's not just a choice, it's a learned emotional reflex, a way of protecting what matters before the world gets to touch it. That's why it can feel so automatic, and why it can feel so hard to explain to someone who shares everything naturally. To them, it's just good news. To you, it's a tender part of your life that you don't want exposed to the wrong reaction. At the end of the day, people who keep their good news quiet aren't always trying to hide. They're trying to preserve, to keep something pure long enough to feel real inside themselves, to make sure it's theirs before it becomes everyone's opinion. And once you see that, you start noticing it everywhere. In the way someone downplays a promotion, in the way they whisper a relationship update like it's confidential, in the way they wait until something is undeniable before they let anyone celebrate with them. It was never just being private. It was a pattern built around emotional safety. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And sometimes that awareness alone changes how you understand your own silence. If this explains something in you or in someone you know, there's more to uncover, not because anything is broken, but because human behavior always has a history.